My name was Dorothy Kocher Olsen. Kocher is my maiden name.
And can you spell it?
Yes, Kocher is Kocher. And I think everybody knows how to spell Olsen. Olsen.
E-N versus...
Norwegian.
Ah, yes, yes. Where and when were you born?
I was born in 1916 in Woodburn, Oregon, which had a big sign over the road that said World's Berry Center. I wish it were still there. My father had a berry farm.
What type of berry?
Loganberries, strawberries, mostly loganberries. And he made 500 gallons of wine every year with the loganberries.
Did you work as a child? Did you work your father's?
Oh, my father was German, and your children worked. We picked berries, and mainly that's about all we did.
What did your mother do? What did your mom do?
My mother was a housewife and a mother, very good mother. In those days, women didn't work out away from the home, especially in the farm women. You know, they stayed home and raised their children.
About how much land did your father have?
My father had more land than money. He loved land. His father gave him a start up in Woodburn, Oregon, but he kept buying more and more. We were really land poor for years and years during the Depression. But he loved this farm. He was a good farmer.
And what do you remember of the Depression? How did that affect your family?
Well, really, I hate to go into this, but it was not very good. When my father sold his berries in the summertime, he had money, and he paid the grocery bill that the grocers lent him credit for the whole winter months until the summer came again. And even as a small child, I can remember the reception was a bit cool when the bill went up, and they had to wait for their money. But it got very warm when the berry season happened and they got paid off. Then we were good for another year.
Did you go without food and clothing? I mean, was it a hardship in that way?
I'm sorry, I didn't get that.
Was it a hardship on you as a child? Were there things that you couldn't have because there was no money?
We didn't really miss a thing. We had it good. My memories are sleeping outside in the summertime, and when I think about how things are today and how they were then, the railroad tracks ran through our farm, and there were hobos, we called them hobos, every single day, and my father would let them sleep in his barn, but he saw that they didn't have any matches. And we would sleep outside with our dog in the bed with us, and the hobos were in the barn less than a block away. You would never do that today.
And he checked that they didn't have matches so they wouldn't...
Well, the barn with hay, to start a fire, if they were smoking and start a fire, that was the only thing that he checked, was that they didn't have matches. And there were always hobos. They would go down the railroad tracks. Why, I don't know. Instead of the road, they were on the railroad tracks. And there was a big trestle over Pudding River that actually almost was part of our farm. And we girls used to walk on that trestle. That was fun.
How many children, brothers and sisters in your family?
One brother, 6 years younger than I, who was on a submarine during the war, and one sister older than I, and both of them died of heart attacks. And my mother died of a heart attack. All three of my family.
Wow. Do you remember as a little girl what you wanted to be when you grew up?
I don't know how old I was, but I was very young. Our main pastime was going to the public library and getting books. And I got the book, The Red Knight of Germany, Baron von Richthofen. And I was just blown away by that. From that day on, I wanted to be a pilot. And I didn't want to just fly any plane. I wanted to fly fighter planes. And I got to. That was a dream come true.
Was that unheard of at the time for a woman to be flying?
No, not even very many men flew in those days. And I was born in 1916, and it was probably the 1920s when I read that book. And I got my private license in 1939, and very few women were flying, at least in our area, very few women were flying then. I got started with a flying club in Woodburn, 19 men and myself, and we bought an airplane, a 40-horsepower Taylorcraft. And one of our members, there were only 3 of us that got private licenses, and one of them wrecked our plane and killed his passenger and lost his leg. So that was the end of our club. But about that time, Jackie Cochran came to our rescue with her program. So then I went off to Sweetwater, and the rest is history.
How do you remember when you did your first flight as a part of this club? Where was the first plane that you flew?
Well, maybe you'd like me to go back to the first time I flew, what got me started on all this.
Yes.
I picked hops one summer during the whole season, and we went to the state fair, and I had already read that book. You know, I had this bee in my bonnet about flying. And we went to the state fair, and I took a ride in an airplane, and I just loved it. And I took one ride after the other until my whole summer's work was spent. And then I decided, well, there has to be an easier way. I'm going to learn to fly myself. And when we were in high school, our civics teacher had each of us say what we were going to do, what our hopes and dreams were for the future. I can see him so plainly today standing over me, Gil Odie. And when I told him I was going to be a flyer, a pilot, he looked down at me and he smirked like, boy, this little gal is really out of it. And I thought then, boy, Gil Odie, I'm going to fly, but it's the very last thing I ever do. But I think I would have anyway, because I really always wanted to, and fighter planes, not any plane. I was so lucky that I got Long Beach.
So how did you, after high school, how did you get hooked up
with flying?
With the flying club?
I had a dance studio in Portland, and I was just about one step ahead of my students. And I would get the money in this hand from teaching dancing, and I would go right up to Woodburn and fly it up. Then go back and teach some more dancing and make some money and go fly some more. And so then Jackie came out with her program.
What type of dance did you teach?
Ballroom, tap, and ballet. I was best at ballroom and tap. The ballet, I was really too old when I started taking that, but I taught the beginners of that.
And what was the name? Do you remember the name of your dance studio?
Pardon me?
Do you remember the name of your studio?
Yes, Dorothy Kocher's dance studio. Yeah. And it was on 69th and Sandy Boulevard in Portland, Oregon, in Rose City.
Wow. So when you went to, how did this group come together to fly? The 19 men and the one woman?
Oh, I was in Portland teaching dancing, but I always took the Woodburn Independent, the paper, and there was a notice in the paper about this club starting. So I called them and asked if I could join, and they said yes, they would like to have me. And so from then on, our instructor was Larry Solar. He had a Ford trimotor airplane, which I think there were only 3 of them in existence. I'm not sure about that, but I know they were rare. And he taught us. We had this little airstrip out in Woodburn, and actually it was almost like having our own plane. When I got my private license, one of my dance students, a young woman, had never been up in a plane before. She worked in a bank. And she and I got in this plane. I had my private license, and we took off for Tacoma, Washington, and all we had was a road map. And I was lost. I've never been a good navigator. I've always been lost. But we took off from Woodburn, and we stopped at every airport to find out where we were, because there were little squalls. It was springtime, and we'd fly around these little squalls. And in a 40-horsepower Taylor craft, the wind will blow you as far sideways as you're going forward almost. And we got to Tacoma. My aunt lived here. We landed at an airfield. I don't think it's there anymore. And we stayed with my aunt in Tacoma, but every day we would fly into Boeing Field in Seattle. And the first time I landed there, I saw this strip, and it looked big to me, and I landed on it, and it was the taxi strip. They called me up to the tower, and I expected to get scolded, but I didn't. They were happy to see a woman flyer. They just told us next time, land on the runway. So every day we would fly back and forth from Seattle to Tacoma, and that was my first cross country.
Was it unusual for a woman to be flying at that point?
Very, very. 1939. Very few, not even a whole lot of men were flying. As I said, our club started with 19, and only 3 of us got a license.
What did the men think about you joining the club? Did they fight you, or were they glad to have a...
Oh, they welcomed me. I've never had a problem with men. I hear that at some of the bases, the men did not welcome the women. I've been so lucky, because every place I've ever been, every base where I was during the war, either where I was assigned or visiting, on a trip, we were treated with respect, almost like big brothers. The men were wonderful to us.
Do you remember where you were when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Do I remember where I was when?
Pearl Harbor. When the war started, Pearl Harbor was attacked.
Oh, when Pearl Harbor was yes. That was 1945. I was stuck in the mud with a war-weary P-19, mud and snow, in Medicine Bow, Wyoming. Is that right? Medicine Bow, I think. Yeah, Wyoming. And I couldn't get my airplane out till I got help.
How did you get involved with the WASPs?
How did I
get started with the WASPs, with Jackie Cochran?
Because she took the women into her training program according to their hours and their licenses. So, of course, Barbara London had a commercial, I believe, when she went in. She was really never a WASP. She was a WAF. They took us according to our license, and I had a private license. So I was in class 43W4. It started with the WAFs, and then 43-1, and so on, until I think the last class was 44W10.
So, did you do it to be patriotic or to fly?
Did
you join?
Did I enjoy it?
No, did you join?
Did I join?
To be patriotic and help the country, or so you could fly a plane?
Do I have to be honest?
Yes.
Fly. My brother was on the submarine, as I told you, but all I wanted to do was fly. Being patriotic would have been nice. I wish I could say I was. I just wanted to fly.
You had a love affair with flying.
Pardon?
You had a love affair with flying.
From the time I was a little girl. And fighter planes. Fast. Alone. That's why I like them. I never liked to fly with somebody in the cockpit beside me.
So when you joined the WASPs, where did you train? What did they do to get you ready?
I was in the class 43W4 that started in Houston. And then when the cadets moved out of Sweetwater, they moved the WASP in, the training command in there for the girls. We really weren't WASP then. I don't think they called us WASP then. That came later. But we flew the PT-19s from Houston over to Sweetwater, our class. So my class was the biggest class of all because it was the two classes joined together, the class that started at Sweetwater and those of us from Houston that flew our PT-19s over there.
What is a PT-19 like?
That's, what does it look like?
Yeah.
Low-wing monoplane, Fairchild. PT-19 training plane was used almost exclusively, I believe, not only for the women but for the men, for primary training. Then you went into the BT, which is a VULT, basic trainer, which really seemed awfully big and powerful to us, you know. I think it was the first time we flew with flaps and all this extra stuff. And then you went into AT-6s and twin-engine AT-11s, which I never liked. The AT-6 is a good airplane. That was the advanced trainer, and that's what you flew to check out into a fighter plane. You would train and fly the AT-6 from the back seat, but when you checked out in it to fly fighters, you sat in front because the nose would be up high like the fighter planes. It was more like a fighter plane sitting in the front than in the back.
Now, you're not a very big woman. You're not tall.
I had to fly with pillows behind me and pillows under me and pillows all around me.
Because your plane is you're trying to see over it, correct?
Unless you're flying a P-38 something with a nose wheel, you come in, you can't see over the top. And I had one trip where I couldn't see any place because I had a P-51 and I had a cracked block. And every landing I would have oil on my windshield until it got so bad the whole windshield was covered. And they finally found out, I think that was Cincinnati, they found out what the problem was, and I dumped the plane there. But I couldn't see a thing out the front. I just had to look out the side. But at the last, when you're finally landing, you can't see out the front anyway. You just cross your fingers and say, Hail Mary.
What was your job? What were you supposed to do?
Well, I was so lucky to get exactly what I wanted. Long Beach, where they had the P-51 and the P-38, the planes I loved, so many times I've been asked, which is your favorite plane? And the only thing I can say is that if I was in a P-51, that was my favorite plane. And if I was in a P-38, that was my favorite plane. I just loved them both. I also flew the P-39 that the men called the bell booby trap. They didn't like it. That's the plane that the engine was in the back and the drive shaft went under the seat to the propeller. And there's one book that says that the women were put into the P-39 and later the P-63 because the men did not want to fly it. We had no problem with it. I kind of liked it, but it was slow. We took those to Great Falls, Montana, and the men took them to Anchorage for the Russians to pick up, but they were obsolete for us. And I was told that Russian women came to Anchorage and picked up some of them, but they wouldn't let us go out of the United States. I did get 2 trips to Montreal, Canada, that I still don't know how I ever got it, flying A-20s, an attack bomber that was a fun plane to fly. And that was fun because there was a young soldier wanting to hitchhike to Montreal. And that plane, the pilot sat up in front and the gunner sat in the back, but you could not walk through the plane. You had to go outside and go around to get into the gunner's place. And this young man, I said, I've never flown this plane before, so if you want to go with me, fine. And he did. He climbed in. He said, at every stop, everybody asked me, can that woman fly that plane? And we got along fine. They wouldn't let us go off of the field at Montreal because they felt the town was too wild for us women. Babies come a long ways. I think today, if that happened, I'd give them an argument. I would like to have gone into Montreal and seen the city. On 2 trips up there, I never got off the field.
Do you remember the first day that you got to fulfill your dream and fly that fighter plane?
It came about in rather an odd way. The thing about a fighter plane is you don't have somebody checking you out in the back. That'll be your first time. They show you the cockpit and tell you what to do, and you get in and you take off. Well, another girl, Iris Cummings, a good pilot. I was thankful I was with her because a lot of girls would have said no. We were, I think, Wichita Falls, or Wichita, I don't know. Anyway, this operations officer had 2 A-24s. And he said, "Do you girls want to deliver these?" And Iris and I both said yes. And I thought he would get in the plane and check us out. I don't know what Iris thought, if she knew what we were doing or not. But anyway, the cockpit was for the gunner, not for another pilot. So we got in, and he showed us what to do, and each of us got in our plane, and we took off, and we had that first experience of flying without having a check pilot with us, which is like a fighter plane. So when I went to fighter school, I breezed through it. I was one of the very first to get through. So then the operations officer, I wish I could remember his name, he was part of the Flying Tigers family. He kept assigning me a P-40 to just put in time while I waited for everybody else to finish up. And I got shocks off of that plane. Every time, and I'm scared to death of electricity, and every time I get in, I'd get a shock off of it, and I would give him a bad time about flying it. And he says, "You're going to have to deliver these, you might as well get used to it." And I told him, "I'll never see another P-40. And he said, "I'll bet you $20. He owes me $20 and, well, how many years interest? And he was wealthy. Schick, Archie Schick was his name. And if he's still alive, he owes me. Never saw another P-40, ever. And I hated that airplane.
So then when was after the P-40, what did you fly after that?
Well, this was a pursuit school, Brownsville, Texas. Then I was sent back to Long Beach, and instead of going, and I got checked in a P-38 at Long Beach. They didn't have those in fighter school. No twin-engine P-38s. But at Long Beach, I got checked out in it. But instead of getting to deliver planes after being a month at pursuit school, I was sent to officers training school, and that was another month. So when I got back, they put me on orders for a P-51, and it was the bubble hatch, which I had never flown. And they asked me to take a half-hour trip around the field and get used to it before I started out. Well, and I had a fuselage tank, and entirely different from what I'd flown. And I flew for maybe 10 or 15 minutes, and I wanted to get going. I didn't empty out that fuselage tank, and I came in and I dropped that airplane about 15 feet. I made a terrible landing because of the extra weight I wasn't used to. That was very embarrassing because I was always really good at landing. I don't know, my instructor, this Larry Solar that had the tri-motor, he never explained to me what happened on a landing. He would just say, hold it off, hold it off. But somehow or another, I just instinctively could judge distance, and I always made good landings. But that was terrible. And I had to take a checkout trip in a AT-6 again before they put me on orders. That really hurt my pride. That was embarrassing.
What's the biggest plane that you flew?
Well, I co-piloted B-17s, but I didn't like them. I never liked the big planes. I had no desire to fly those. And I was first pilot on a C-47. I didn't like that. I just wanted fighters, that's all.
The big planes weren't fast enough.
And somebody beside you.
Uh-huh.
I like to be alone.
Was it scary? Were you ever scared?
I think if I should have been scared, you're too busy getting yourself out of a predicament. I can't remember ever being scared, really. I've been, I don't know, there's been time when it wasn't comfortable, but not scared. You're just busy. Your mind isn't on. Your mind is thinking about what you have to do, so you have no time to be scared.
Did you ever have to ditch one of your planes?
Never, never.
No hard landings?
The only problem I ever had was with the, well, you know, in my logbook it says emergency landing in a P-63 or P-39. I don't remember which it was, but I don't remember the emergency landing. It couldn't have been too bad. One thing I do remember about the P-39 or the P-63, I can't remember when we made the change, when the 63 came out, was a landing. And I think it was Fargo, North Dakota, and it was a new base. It just opened up. And there was snow piled on both sides of the runway higher than my head, and the runway was solid ice. And when I came into land, I had no idea what to expect, but there was no problem at all. I wasn't scared, but I was sitting up straight and paying attention.
You put a lot of miles on.
Pardon me?
You covered a lot of area.
Oh, yeah. It was sort of a round trip thing. Of course, there were variations, but so many times we would leave Long Beach in the P-38 or P-51 and deliver it to Newark, New Jersey, and then take military airlines over to Niagara Falls and pick up a P-63 and go to Great Falls, Montana, where, as I said, the men took them to Anchorage. And then we'd go back to Long Beach and start over. But of course, there would be other trips in between, like the A-20s that I got. I got one trip, a PQ-14, and they put me in that. That was a drone. They put me in that because it had tricycle gear, and I'd been flying P-38s, and that's a little tiny thing. I couldn't find the ground with that thing. When I'd come into land, I'd start leveling off. Like in a P-38, and I'd come down in steps. And the girls had a party at our BOQ, and they gave me a little tiny airplane with a tag on it, something about Kocher and the PQ-14. Don't give her a PQ-14 because I made such a fuss about it. I still got that in the footlocker.
That was, what were the other women like, the girls like? Was there a good friendship, a club, or?
Oh, we had wonderful friendship, but once we got into fighters, we hardly ever saw anybody anymore. You know, we would all go our separate ways on orders, come back, maybe get home at 3 o'clock in the morning. I'd shampoo my hair and put it up in pin curls and go to bed, get up and go out again. When we first went there, it was quite different. We were flying basic trainers, delivering them. So we would come back to our BOQ and we would see each other, and there was more social life. But once we got into fighters, we were just on the road all the time, either in the air or coming back. There was no time for social life.
How many days a week?
Oh, we never kept track of that. We never took time off. I think I had a week off to come home when the boy I was going to marry died. He was in the naval training at Farragut, does that sound right? And they had a spinal meningitis epidemic. And he was a football player, big and strong and healthy and handsome. And he thought he had a cold, and he didn't go to the infirmary. And his best friend wrote me and told me this. And he went to bed and stayed there and died in that bed with spinal meningitis. So I came home for a week for his funeral, and then I went back. And when I went back, I didn't realize what was going on, but they were trying to decide whether to hold me back with the class behind me because I'd missed a week of training or to let me go ahead. And this instructor took me up and he really rang me out. He did every maneuver in the book. His name, I don't remember his real name, but we called him Hookie. And Hookie, if you're still there, I'll never forget you.
He was trying to wash you out?
He just wanted to see if I should be held back or if I could take it, if I could go ahead.
And so you went ahead?
I went ahead. I didn't miss a thing.
Were you a good pilot?
Pardon?
Are you a good pilot? Are you a great pilot?
From what the boy said, I'm a great pilot. I've got a picture of our last party at Long Beach, all pursuit pilots, the women, and all the operations officer in that picture. And on the back, they all wrote little notes to me. And everyone was so complimentary. I wish Kim could find that and show it to you because their comments really mean a lot to me. Like to little Dottie, who delivered all of our P-38s. And another one said, to Dottie, a hot pilot. I've never had the pleasure, but I do believe the boys. Words like that, you know.
Did you ever have a little romance in there?
A little...
Romance? Young men?
Well, never a serious one. I had the most beautiful friendship with a man that I've ever had, and it was purely friendship because we both loved flying. He was married, but his wife had nothing to worry about because he'd kiss me goodnight like my brother had kissed me, you know. Because we loved flying, we would go out, we'd do things like go out and get a night check in a P-38, each of us, you know, things we didn't have to do, but because we loved flying, and we just talked flying, you know, and have a drink together. That was a nice friendship. And he's the one that after we came home, quite some time after, he went by our BOQ, and he took down the sign that said WASP, BOQ, and he mailed it to me. That's in the Museum of Flight now, in the WASP exhibit. That was Robert Whiteley, Lieutenant Whiteley.
Wow.
That was as close to a romance. There was another one. He was a test pilot for Douglas that was right across the field from us, Captain Sam McFadden. He was a big, tall, wonderful pilot, test pilot, with a handlebar mustache, and a wonderful dancer. And we dated whenever I was on the field. And nothing really got really serious, but we had wonderful times together. The thing I remember is the only time I heard a big band. He took me to this place, and I'll never forget it, this place where this big band, maybe Artie Shaw or Tommy Dorsey. And wonderful dates, like his mother would fix picnic baskets for us to go down on the beach. And he had a dog, and I love people that have dogs, that love animals, you know. He was a good friend. That was as close to a romance as I ever got, those two men.
So you did get a little bit of free time to be able to go out and go dancing or...
Before we got into the fighter planes, when we were flying basic, after we started flying fighters, there was no time for romance. Maybe one-night stands on the trips. I always took my high-heeled dance shoes along and shoe bags on my wrist. But those things, we'd see them for one night and dance and have a good time, and that was it. Never see them again. Like a sailor.
I have to clarify for history, a one-night stand in your time is much different than a one-night stand today.
Very, very true. Very true.
You went dancing.
Yeah, there was dancing, period.
Was it a more innocent time?
Very much so. I don't like the changes. I wish we could turn back the clock. And it's TV and the freedom of speech where anything goes. I don't like it. It's like a speed limit on the highway. People should not be able to say all these nasty, dirty words on TV. I'm very unhappy about that. So that's what all the little kids hear, you know, and the scenes. Every time you turn on the damn TV, somebody's climbing in bed.
That's why
Edit this.
that's why I clarified what a one-night stand was with in your time. Now, the WASPs were unique in the fact that you were not military, correct?
That came up quite late in the program, this idea about militarization. I think Jacqueline Cochran, was all for it. Nancy Love was totally against it. And I can see why, because Jackie would have been over her. I wanted it because I felt that was a way to keep flying. Otherwise, we were through. Whoever thought that we'd get all this attention at this late date? We came home, I felt like I had been fired from my job. We came home, nothing, you know, and nothing to go to because my dance studio was gone. That was like starting over again, so I got married. 6 months. I had 3 days with my husband. I really lucked out there. I had a wonderful man, just wonderful. And I've got good kids.
Had your husband been in the service?
No, he had been in 2 very, very bad accidents, patrol accidents, and he couldn't pass the physical. And he did not like flying. We had an argument for the 62 years we were married. I took him up in a PT-19 that I was delivering. He was at Wallula Junction on the State Patrol, and he met me at the field, and not at Wallula because there's no field there, but nearby. And I took him up in this PT-19, and he was going like this. And for 62 years, he said he was going like that. We never did solve that problem.
Men are always like that. They won't admit that.
There was something, I can't remember, one of the news articles years ago mentioned about my flying, and then they said she's married to Harold Olsen, a state patrolman, who loves terra firma.
How did you find out that you were done?
How did I find out that we were over with? I really don't remember. It must have been Barbara told us probably that we would be going home for Christmas. But see, we didn't know there was the atomic bomb. We had no idea that the war was almost over. That's why I felt like I'd been fired, because the field was full of P-51s waiting to be delivered. And my brother was still on the submarine in the Philippines someplace. And we were going home. Can you understand the feeling that would be? You know, why? Why weren't we still doing it, you know? But we found out. The war was almost over.
Which had to be just sad because you had such a love for flying.
Saddest day of my life. Rex Mays, have you ever heard of him? He raced cars at Indianapolis. He was in transition, and he was a friend of mine, a good friend, purely platonic. He came and got me at the last plane I delivered. I bawled all the way home.
Wow.
He offered to give me one of his souped-up little Model T Fords to pacify me and get me to stop crying. Oh, I didn't want it. I've been sorry for all these years that I didn't take him up on it. He was killed racing cars in California. I've still got the write-up from the paper. My friend that sent the BOQ thing to me that's in the museum sent me the notice about Rex's death.
Wow.
He was a good friend.
Did you get to fly much after being a WASP? Did you ever get the opportunity?
I could have gone out to the field and rented planes, but after you fly P-38s, who on P-51s, who wants to fly around the field in a Cessna or a Taylorcraft? Spoiled it for me. I never wanted to fly again. And the maintenance we had, everything. I delivered a couple of PT-19s from Ponca City, Oklahoma, to Troutdale. That was enough. My parachute, I could shrug and it'd fall off my shoulders. And that was when I was stuck in Medicine Bow in the snow. And I remember flying down the Columbia River Gorge, and it was so stormy, and the plane was going sideways as fast as it was going forward. It was a little bit of that. I got married.
What did your mom and dad think about you flying?
Well, my dad died very shortly before I got into the flying. I was flying. I took him up in the plane, and I think that was the Taylorcraft. Maybe we had a 60 horsepower by that time. But I took my dad for a ride in it, and I took my mother, and I caught her in the act. She was in the back seat. Neither of them liked flying.
Because that had not only a woman flying at that time, but flying would have been so new to them, correct?
They never saw airplanes, especially being on the farm like that.
Are you proud of what you did as a WASP?
Well, I don't know if proud is the word, but I feel very lucky that I had that opportunity to make that dream come true. It doesn't happen to very many people.
Do you realize how much you changed the world for women?
Yes. It's so different now, but I don't know if it's better, but it's different.
Because I know it sounds like you were very lucky that everybody accepted you as a flyer. And I know some of the women...
I didn't really understand that.
The men accepted you
Oh.
as a flyer, where some of the women...
Oh. It's hard for me to believe some of these stories because we were treated so nicely. I remember they treated us as equals. I remember coming back from a flight, and there was a high officer on board. And this was, I don't know if it was commercial. I think it was commercial. And this officer insisted on carrying my B-4 bag and my parachute. And one of the men from our field, a captain, was walking alongside of me, and he says, "Man bites dog." That just doesn't happen.
Wow. Did you lose any of your pilots, your friends? Did they have accidents?
Yes. So I think maybe the first or second week I was in Long Beach, the gal, Jenny Moffat, that checked me out, each of us as we'd come, the older girls would take a ride with us in a BT, a basic trainer, and Jenny Moffat was the one that checked me out, and she died in a BT, I think it was, and it burned, and they said all that was left of Jenny was the buckles on her shoes. We wore men's shoes as a rule because we couldn't get shoes during the war. We had ration cards. That happened very soon after I got to Long Beach.
And that didn't scare you?
Not a bit. Not a bit, but I missed her. And when I was in training, we had BOQs, and 6 in each one, and we were connected with to the next one with a bathroom in between shower for all of us. And Margaret Oldenburger was in the one on the other side of our shower. And this was at Sweetwater, not Houston, Sweetwater. And she was killed on a night flight with Mr. Aubrey, her instructor. I never heard the details, but they were night flying, and they were both killed. And that was when we first got there. So it seemed like I never thought of that before. My introduction to both places happened with fatalities. You just accepted it.
And my understanding is that because you weren't military, that if somebody got killed, their family was responsible for paying for him to get home. That you had no.
My understanding is the same, that they didn't pay for the girls' shipment home, the bodies home. I know when we were in instrument training, Sharon and I were the only two that got B-25s. Everybody else got AT-11s, I think. And Sharon was killed in a B-25 there, and she was from Portland, Oregon. And they asked me if I wanted to take her body home. But I wanted to get through training, and Jenny Restu had washed out of instrument training, and she lives in Portland, so she took Sharon's body home.
Wow. I'm just keeping an eye on my tape. So after the war, you didn't fly at all then?
Pardon me?
You never flew again?
After I got out,
Yeah.
never. If I can't fly P-38s and P-51s, I don't want to fly.
When you flew, what did you wear? Because you weren't pressurized, right?
Just like this. Pants and a jacket.
Did you have to wear a parachute?
Always. And I always packed a pillow bin with me. In fact, I took that pillow home with me. It was yellow and it had U.S. Air Force on it. And I used to use it. I loved to work out in the yard, in the garden, you know, weeding and planting and stuff. And I would use this to kneel on. And somebody took it from my yard, and I think I knew who it was. We had a little boy whose name was Loverock that would bring milk to us. And I always talked airplanes to him. You know, you've got to learn to fly when you get big. And he did. He became a major. But I think that little boy packed my yellow air pillow home with him.
Wow.
So, Oscar Loverock, if you're watching this, please give me back my pillow.
I know you took it.
I know you did. He's a major.
Wow.
And he's probably still alive because he was so much younger than I.
Wow. Let me, 1 second, I'm going to switch tapes, just 1 second. And I have a couple more questions. Are you doing okay?
I'm okay.
Okay. Did you ever meet Jackie?
Pardon me?
Did you ever meet Jackie Cochran?
Did I?
Ever meet
Well,
Jackie?
I can't say that I've had a personal meeting with her, but she came and talked to the group of us, I think more than once.
What do you remember of her? What was she, when you saw her?
Was I when?
When you saw her, what was she like? Was she a strong woman?
That's hard to answer. She wasn't petite. She was, but she wasn't. She had a nice figure. She was an attractive person, very, and I think a very ambitious person. I think if you described her in one word, it would have to be ambitious. Second word would be successful.
Was she a pilot, do you know? Did she fly?
Jackie Cochran? Oh, come on. You know. That's a loaded question. You can do better than that.
Do you think she had the love that you had for flying?
I'm sure she did, or she couldn't have been so successful at it. And she was a gutsy gal. I think probably, in one word, Jackie was gutsy.
The other women, did they fly for the same reason you did, or do you think they all had different reasons for flying?
I think the good pilots flew for the reason I do, that they love to fly. And some of them got there maybe quite by accident, and they didn't last. They washed out. You got weeded out at every stage of transition. There would people being washed out and going home, or else if you didn't make it through transition, you were transferred to the training command, and nobody wanted that. We wanted the ferry command.
Did you ever have to tow targets?
Never. See, that was training command, just ferry command.
And that was boring.
That's all.
Yeah. Slow. You wanted fast.
I just loved the fighters. Always, from the time I was little, with that book in my mind, you know, The Red Knight of Germany, in a fighter plane. He was my hero.
Was there anybody in your, because you had the book that inspired you, but was there a person also who inspired you?
That book, period. And then maybe that smirk from my civics teacher put a little bit of stiffness in my backbone.
Did you ever get a chance to go back and tell him that you flew planes?
No, and I wish I had. I think he knew, though, because there was always notices in the Woodburn Independent, whatever I did, the hometown paper. So I'm pretty sure it got back to him one way or another.
I can't remember if it was Barbara or one of the other pilots, but they had worked at Boeing building planes prior to the war. In fact, it might have been Mary Call, and she had a very nice man that worked with her, and she told him, someday I'm going to fly one of these.
And she did.
And she did, and she came back, and the gentleman was a mentor to her, and he was so excited to hear her say, I flew one.
You don't remember who she is?
I think it was Mary Call.
Oh, see, I don't know her.
Or Lois Actaloni, and that might be her married name, not her maiden name. That's the hard part, is it may be a... Did you keep in touch with many of the pilots?
No, with Tita, with Alta Corbett from the training command, I would like to have kept in touch with B.J. London, but she doesn't use the computer, you know. We email back and forth, and for some reason she doesn't use the computer, and I haven't kept in touch with the others. Really, we didn't get, we were so busy flying, there was no time to spend a lot of time together. Just the first few weeks when we got to Long Beach that we had a little bit of social life.
I think that's what people don't realize. You were working.
Every day. I never took one day of sick leave. Just that week that I came home from my, for Earl's funeral.
Do you go to many of the
reunions? I missed a couple that I wish I had gone to. I went to one in Portland. What I really enjoy is the things that the Museum of Flight have in Seattle. And we have a gal in Seattle, Debbie Jennings, who's sort of a WASP historian. She just has been interested in WASP for years, and she's a friend of mine. And when we went to Washington, D.C. to get those medals, she was on that trip. And we have a lot of fun together. We've become quite close.
What do WASPs talk about when you get together?
Well, you see, the only one I've been with, really, in years and years, is Alta Corbett in Squim, and she was in the training command. We don't talk about the days that we were there, because, for one thing, her work was entirely different. She towed targets, and I ferried. We talk about family. We don't talk about flying.
So, during the war, men pilots were very, especially fighter pilots. They were a stud. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You know, the men fighter pilots always sort of were in a class of their own, and we kind of shot a hole through that idea, you know. So when all these women, especially little women, you know, were flying these big planes, it kind of hurt their ego, I think, but not all of them. I think any man that was secure in himself, you know, it wouldn't bother him. I never met one that seemed to resent me, not one man, all the while I was flying, that seemed to resent the fact that I was flying, not one.
Because I was wondering if you flying a fighter plane kind of put you in that category. If a lot of people looked and, wow, she's flying fighter planes. Did you get some of that?
I didn't really get that question.
I'm sorry. The men that flew fighter planes, everybody went, wow, a fighter pilot. What about the women? Did they look at you and go, wow, she flew fighter planes? Did that put you in a class of your own?
I think for some men it may have bothered them, but I don't think it bothered very many of them. I think they were happy for us. The men that I knew were wonderful to us, just wonderful. I never felt that they resented me, although my husband talked on the phone for a long time because I can't hear on the phone. I haven't been able, I don't know how old I was, but I was given massive doses of streptomycin and they killed the nerve in both ears. So I've been totally deaf ever since then, you know, and that's been years and years. I spent 37 years and I never heard a single sound before I got this cochlear implant. But my husband talked on the phone to somebody who had been in training with me, and he said, that was instrument training, and he said that our instructor felt women had no place in the air, that they should not be flying. That in all those 22 months I was in this business of flying, that was the only comment that was negative.
Wow.
The only instance, and I only got that years and years afterward.
I think when I asked Barbara the question, Barbara London, she said the only jealousy was one time she was taxiing up, and I forget what plane, but she had like a nice, fancy, fast plane, and the young man was in some slow dog of a plane, and there was that look of envy and jealousy of, oh, so.
That was her only experience.
Yeah. And it wasn't, she said it wasn't bad, it was just you could see him kind of looking like, I wish I were flying that plane.
That makes me think of one instance that I really enjoyed when I took an A-24, which is a Navy SBD. In fact, this was an SBD because I was checked in the A-24. I took it over to San Pedro, and when I landed, the airfield was full of sailors. And it really was quite a commotion. But it wasn't antagonistic. It was like, you know, they were surprised. And it was pleasant. I loved it. Like, what's that gal doing in that A-24? Because that was quite a nice plane.
And they were probably glad to see a woman.
Pardon?
They were probably glad to see a woman.
Yeah, they acted surprised and happy, you know.
I can't remember. I talked to somebody who said that at one of the bases where a lot of the women were, that there were a lot of diverted men flights that had to just stop, and
there were a lot of the men.
A lot of the men found an excuse to stop at the base where all the women were because they wanted to see the women. So they would find an excuse to...
Oh, I think that was when we were in training, wasn't it?
Yes.
We were at Sweetwater, and there was a cadet field very near. In fact, they would bus the men over for us for Saturday night dances and stuff back to Sweetwater. Yeah. The training was fun. Training was really great at Sweetwater.
it sounds like you had a wonderful time and were able to fulfill your dream.
It was just wonderful from start to finish, especially after we left Houston. Houston was really pretty primitive. We didn't live on the field, we lived in motels. First time I'd ever seen a bug too big to step on. And there were plenty of them. And we were so crowded, we were crammed together in this motel, and we would take a bus out to the field, and it was rainy and muddy, and well, to tell you the truth, I would have quit, except I didn't want to be a quitter. I didn't want to come home and say I couldn't take it, but I hated it the first week or two. But it didn't take me long to kind of get in the groove, and I loved it, every bit of it from then on. But the first week, I would like to have quit.
Had the war of not come along,
How did?
if World War II had never started, do you think you would have ever gotten the chances and the opportunities that you had to fly?
Never in a million years. That war was a terrible thing, but it was the best thing that ever happened to me. I never could have flown those airplanes without that. I would have been too old, you know, and I didn't go to college to get the flying training. I didn't even know that they offered it, you know. We didn't have counselors in high school in those days to steer us, you know. So when I got through school, it was a matter of if I wanted to fly, I had to pay for it myself, so I had to make money. So, and I got into dancing quite by accident. I was a really fat, corn-fed farm girl, and I started taking tap dancing, and I paid for my own, because this was Depression days, you know. Parents did good if they could feed you. And I lost all that fat. I remember it came back to me when that somebody said the high school had a program, and I was the star. I was a tinfoil lady, and I hopped out of a box, you know, and did a dance. And somebody said, how could that fat girl do that? But I wasn't fat after I started dancing. But now I'm off the track anyway. Never would I have ever gotten to fly had the war not come when it did. And I was the right age, and I had the right pilot's license to get in the early class, and I got the Long Beach that I wanted where the planes were. Everything worked for me. Somebody's watching out for me.
Do you think you would have ended up just being a dance teacher the rest of your life had you have not?
I don't really. I've never even thought about it. I don't know what would have happened at this. Everything seems like it kind of fell in place at the right time for me. Like I say, somebody watches out for me, even to this day.
What a wonderful life you've had.
Wonderful.
I mean, to be able to say that you flew a fighter plane.
What I wanted.
Puts you in a very small, unique class of women of your era.
And the fighter planes, especially the P-51, is so small. I remember seeing one tall man taxiing out with a bubble canopy, and he was like this. And I thought, how in the world can he fly 4 hours? Because it would be, you know, we'd land about every 4 hours or even sooner. And he was like this, and it must have been awful for him. Those planes were made for small people. Most fighter pilots, it seems to me, were small, male and female. See, my friend Tita, that was in the training command, she's a big gal. She's not fat, but she's large-boned, you know. And she wouldn't have fit in the P-51 like I do.
My dad would have been jealous of you because my dad...
He would have been jealous.
Because he got in right at the end of the war.
So he didn't get to fly these.
He wanted, and that's it. He went down to Texas, and he started putting his hours in, and he was just on little trainers. But all the programs kept getting washed out as he would start them. So he never got it. And after the war, he went home to raise a family and never had the money to fly again. So you were very lucky.
Did he resent the women?
No, he didn't resent him. He just wished that he could have flown. I mean, he flew a little bit, but, so.
Do you know what planes he flew?
I just remember they were little tiny trainers. That's all I
Trainers.
remember. And I'm terrible at remembering plane models and names. But he was in Texas in the Navy.
What part of Texas?
I'm trying to think of the name. God, where was he? Bell? No, Bellflower. Because I have a record that he recorded for my grandma, a record letter that said, "Hi, Grandma," or "Hi, Muddy, we're in wherever, Texas." And then he played a little boogie woogie for her. But I forget where he's at now. I can't think of it. So.
Well, it's been a long time.
Did she mention flying into a Navy field?
Yeah, with all the sailors were... He asked if you mentioned flying in where all the sailors were when they came out to see you.
If I mentioned...
Flying in where the sailors were at the airfield. And
yes, I did, because I really love that.
She also mentioned she had some one-night stands, but we clarified what one-night stands were. So.
How about flying the Bell Air Cobras to Great Falls, Montana?
Flying the Bell Air Cobras to Great Falls?
Yeah.
To Great Falls, Montana.
Yeah.
What was that about?
Well, what was that about, Kim? I think we covered that.
Did we? Okay.
Yeah. We took them to Great Falls.
Oh yeah. And then because you couldn't fly out of the country, so you flew them to there, and then somebody else took them up so that the Russian
they
women
wouldn't let us go out.
Yeah.
And I told you they wouldn't let me go off the field at Montreal.
I know.
To go into town.
Those Canadians.
And I took it. I never said a word. I did what I was told. I was really nice in those days.
Well, thank you very much.
You're very welcome, and I've enjoyed it, and I was like this about it.
I told you, it's just such a pleasure. You had such a wonderful story.
Well, thank you.
So,
I hope it's worth your time, because you went to a lot of work.
No, wonderful, wonderful story. Every little piece goes together to build the puzzle, and your life and the fact that you loved it. Not many people are lucky enough to get to do what they have a passion for.
I'm going to get in trouble. Ask her about the nose gear.
Kim says to ask you about the nose gear.
Or actually, ask her about the piece of a P-38.
He says the piece of a P-38.
I would like to forget that. I'll tell you an instance that I really enjoy thinking about. Cherry Point, North Carolina, a Marine base. I sat on the end of the runway in a P-51. Every plane felt different, and this was one that was so perfect. I just loved it. And I thought, I wonder how it would feel if I ran. We would run the engine up and try it and then pull back and then gradually ease the throttle forward and roll down the runway and take off and pick up our gear. Well, I thought, I wonder how it would feel if I held the brakes and opened it up and let it go and pulled my gear up when I was about this far off. Because when you pull your gear up, you shoot forward. And I did it, and I took a steep climbing turn out of there, and the tower called me, and I thought, I've done it again. I'm in trouble. And he says, come back soon. That was fun. I loved that. Well, I was slow rolling a P-38, and the nose wheel counting door came open. And when I landed in left field, I came in, and the line crew gave me this part of the plane, and the operations officer scolded me for letting my gear down when I was going too fast. And I took it, I was happy. I got off that easy. I was lucky from day one Somebody was looking out for me all the time.
Yeah, you
'Cause
were.
at the last, when I knew we were going home, I just wanted to squeeze out every bit of fun I could out of those airplanes, because I knew I'd never fly them again. And I was flying on the wing of a Navy plane, and I had a P-51, and I had my flaps down because our plane, they can go like this and leave us. But this way, I had to fly with flaps to stay with him, and I was flying on his wing. And I thought all roads led to Dallas, but I was wrong. He was going way down south. And when I finally got off of his wing, I told you I was a horrible navigator. I was always lost. I was always buzzing railroad stations to find out where I was. And I was way south. And in the meantime, Rex Mays was at Love Field organizing a group to go out and start looking for me. And I started back, and I found out where I was, and I started back for Love Field, and my gas gauge was way down. And I saw a field, and I landed, and the first person that came out was an instructor from Sweetwater. And I was so glad to see him, and I hugged him. And this was a cadet base with 86s. He told my husband on the phone many years later that he was a hero of the whole base for years after, because of that girl pilot that hugged him. And they checked my gas. I had enough to get back to Dallas, and before they started looking for me. That was just one time I was lost.
Because you did line of sight, correct? You had to see a water tower or a highway. That's what you navigated with. Did you use landmarks to navigate?
You know, with fighter planes, it's awfully hard to get lost because you go from checkpoint to checkpoint so fast. It's easy to get lost in a 40-horsepower Taylor craft. Like I told you, I landed every field to find out where I was. But in a fighter plane, you go from checkpoint to checkpoint. There's no excuse for getting lost. But I found an excuse. But the fastest way to find out where I was to follow the tracks and find a station, and buzz it. That was easier than doing it the hard way, the way I should have. I did everything the easy way.
Because I talked to one woman who got in trouble because she in the Midwest, she used the water towers because the name of the city was on it, and she had come down and got a little low and kind of scared the people in the city. So.
Oh, if I'd ever gotten a trip over my hometown, I probably would have killed myself. They'd never let me have an airplane to Portland, Oregon, because I think they knew what I'd do.
So you never got a chance to buzz?
I never got a chance to buzz in my hometown. That would have been the ultimate. You file that, honey. For good.
Well, I'm going to turn off the recorder now.